We good to go? Yes. Kia ora koutou, no mai, haere mai, welcome. My name is Dane Gunnell and I'm the Head of Price Quality Regulation here at the Commission. I'll kick us off with a karakia and I've also got a brief intro before I'll hand over to the team for the main event. They'll introduce themselves as they speak, and obviously we're very keen for discussion today, but we won't do a full round of introductions now. I just ask that when you speak, you just state your organisation and who you are. Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta. Kia mataratara ki tai. E hiaka ana te ata kura. E tio, e huka, e ho ho. Haumie, huie, tāke. Thank you. First off, I just want to thank everyone for making themselves available for the workshop. We know there's a lot going on in the industry and we really have had a lot of useful input into our processes and submissions and feedback to date, but we recognise there's a real benefit in two-way conversation, being able to push and pull ideas and thinking in real time. So let's make it a two-way conversation today. We're very keen to hear from people and just thank you again for giving up your time for this. In terms of the immediate context for the workshop, it's formally part of the IM review, so it is being recorded today and there'll be the opportunity for written submissions at the conclusion of the workshop. We've got draft decisions in the middle of next year and of course final decisions at the end of next year. We'll take stock after today and there may be the opportunity for potentially further engagement in the lead up to the draft, depending on what we get to, what we see as beneficial. I'll also just briefly draw your attention to our decision-making framework. So many of you will be aware that the Commission has a decision-making framework that it uses to reach its decisions. We've recently published a paper on this, setting out the framework after consulting on an earlier draft. It's really helpful for us if your feedback is provided with this in mind, to take issues and put them in the context that we'll have to consider them when we come to reach our decisions. So there's a link in the slide pack, which we'll update on the website, because I think the original circulation of the slide pack didn't have that link in there, but it'll be updated with it. It'd also be remiss of me not to mention the bigger picture context for this workshop and the review. It of course comes at a time of great change and a period of uncertainty for the industry with the challenge of decarbonisation. We've heard from industry consistently in submissions about this, and of course Transpower's recently set out that it's anticipating a 50% increase in revenues for the next regulatory period, and we're aware of the multi-factor increase in connection applications. And of course, there's the recent Boston Consulting Report as well, which sets out a significant uptick in investment across the sector required to meet the challenge. We've also heard more specifically that submitters are interested in the flexibility in our rules to deal with the uncertainty. And we're very much open-minded as we consider the issues and how we might need to change our rules to ensure they're fit for purpose. And hopefully today what we can get into is a bit more of the detail of how those issues intersect with our specific rules and progress some of the potential solutions. So with that, I'll hand over to Simon Todd, one of our chief advisors, who'll lead through a bit more on the purpose of the workshop and how it's going to work today.
Thanks, Dane. So yes, my name is Simon Todd. I'm Chief Advisor here at the Commission. I focus on Transpower EDB gas issues, lately Transpower. I'll just run through, that was a great intro from Dane. The purpose of the session is to gather information about information that perhaps we didn't feel was sufficient in the submission material that we need to progress to assist our analysis. It's just an opportunity for both Transpower and other stakeholders to provide us with views about certain key issues. I'd sort of characterise the session more as largely a bottom-up type session where it's very issue specific, although within the context of the top-down sector uncertainty, we're very aware of the issues that Transpower faces, and we want to try and make sure that the CapEx IM is fit for purpose going into the future. So we've just proposed sort of 10 general topics for discussion. We're sort of allotted about 10 minutes for each of these topics, but as a discussion moves, it waxes and wanes. We're not constrained by that. We do have a bit of an overflow at the end of the session. If discussions carry on, that's okay. We're all right for time. And as Dane noted, the session is going to be recorded for interested parties to then listen again. And also there's a 2-week comment period for people to sort of condense their thoughts and perhaps elaborate on a lot of the discussion we have today. So we're not constraining the session at all. We sort of have a little bit of time at the end, of course. I thought we'd start actually with our expert in fibre IMs, which is Josh, just to discuss. One of the submission points made was that the CapEx IM would benefit from being aligned more with the way the fibre IMs are set out, prudent and efficient test. I thought maybe Josh could give us a bit of a background on the way the fibre IM CapEx approval process was derived and why that was the case. Just set a platform for that. So, the ground rules for today. Sorry about that. Just missed the ground rules. If you could avoid speaking over others and respective views, you use your hand if you're online to. If you wish to speak, we'll try and get to you. There's a comments section as well where you can type questions. And also, these slides are just to facilitate discussion, right? So they should be taken in the context that those starter points for 10, just to get the discussion flowing. So we're not constraining ourselves to any of these questions or discussion points made. And the Transpower submission material is just to try and highlight the point made. So nothing more than that. So I'll pass over to Josh.
Okay.
And we'll talk about the fibre IMs.
Thanks, Simon. Hi, everybody. So I'm Josh. I'm a chief advisor in the fibre PQ team. So I thought it'd just be useful to talk a little bit about some of the context and background to developing the fibre IMs. So we developed the fibre CapEx IM from around 2018 to 2020. And when we started the process, we drew quite heavily on our experience from working on Transpower. And I think that can be seen in how we carried over things like some of the key frameworks for the IM, so things like process and timeframes for evaluating and developing the proposals, how the expenditure is split into different categories, so with the base CapEx proposals, which is similar to Transpower, as well as the evaluation criteria. So when we looked at examples of evaluation criteria, we did look at the Transpower CapEx IM, but also the customised price path requirements as well. And when we were, the final result for the fibre CapEx IM was that the evaluation criteria would apply to all types of CapEx. So in the fibre IM, we've got base CapEx, which is designed to cover the majority of CapEx for Chorus, but also includes connection CapEx and individual CapEx, which is for one-off larger projects during the price path. So the evaluation criteria was developed to apply to all proposals. The purpose of it was to allow a flexible approach to evaluating a wide range of potential programs and projects that Chorus may wish to apply during the in developing the proposal, but also during the price path. And I think part of the reason for that was that there was a bit of uncertainty at the time when we were developing the rules and processes around the particular types of projects and programs that Chorus may apply for during a price path. Particularly at that point, it was expected that the majority of the UFP build for Chorus would have been completed or near completion by the start of the first price path, and
there was a lot of potentially different types of complexity and different types of projects that Chorus may wish to apply for during the price path. So part of the purpose was to keep the evaluation criteria flexible enough to be able to deal with these different scenarios. Another sort of issue or theme that was behind some of the decisions around the evaluation criteria was that in the fibre sector there was no equivalent to vol, so it made it difficult to design a sort of a grid investment test. So we did look for particular equivalents, but at the time it was quite difficult to envisage how a sort of equivalent net market benefit test would run in the fibre sector. So in the end, we opted for a more of a flexible principle-based approach to evaluating expenditure. So that's really sort of behind behind the decisions for the evaluation criteria. There were definitely some feedback from stakeholders around wanting more prescription, particularly around the economic analysis and cost benefit for evaluating particularly larger network expansion projects. But yeah, in the end, that's where we landed. Are there any sort of questions?
So is there a move to define a value of lost service in the fibre sector? And if there is sort of some quantified value of loss of service, do you think the grid investment test and the fibre IMs would expand or become more definitive? Or
definitely, potentially. We have been discussing with Chorus around the potential for an equivalent for a loss of service for monetising loss of service. So they are currently looking around to see how such a concept might be developed. And but I think it's probably early days.
So I imagine it'll be similar to vol, and that it'll be sector specific, time of day specific, time specific, duration specific as well, and probably location specific. With vol, there's a range of vol studies ever done. There's usually a wide range of vol values that pop out of that. $20,000 is just a placeholder, isn't it? And Transpower can propose an alternative if the situation requires it.
I think from so Joel Cook, Head of Regulation at Transpower. Thank you very much, Joss. It's very interesting. I think we've got the reason we looked at the fibre IMs and were quite interested in it was, as you mentioned, about the flexibility and to pick up different types of investments. So in the investment test, it's split into two kind of parts. So we've got economic investments, which is are there investments we can make which deliver net electricity market benefits, and then there's reliability investments, which are against the grid reliability standards, which are actually set out in the Electricity Industry Participation Code. And that's where our vol impact comes through. And we think going forward, particularly with electrification, vol is going to become very important, and it will need to be something that needs to be looked at along with resilience. And we think that's a conversation that we've flagged with the Electricity Authority that we may need to have. I think part of the concerns around that is we at the moment, so we've got vol of 20,000 in the grid reliability standards, but looking out to 2050, is 20,000 still the appropriate vol for them? So I'm getting a bit of detail. We made a conscious decision that at the moment not to go out and try and figure out what the vol would be in 2050 because we don't think we'll have enough information there. We don't have enough penetration of EVs. We haven't had a big switch away from gas if that's going to happen, that sort of stuff. So we consciously thought, well, vol, we need to look at a longer term time frame on that. And our immediate focus, and this is what we're testing with the NZGP, is around the net electricity market benefits and whether there's any greater flexibility we might need there. And so one of the things that we're looking at via the Net Zero Grid Pathways project is how flexible is the investment test to these net electricity market benefits? I mean, from my understanding, this is the first one we've done with the Commission. So we are going to try and test the boundaries of the current investment test. But even just going into this one, and we'll get to the detail, but there is prescription in there which it's not wrong, it just may not necessarily be helpful for framing up how we deliver electrification. So that's why we highlighted the fibre one. We just sort of saw that and go, well, if we are stepping back and going, what would a prudent and efficient operator do to help deliver electrification given government policies as a pure net electricity market benefit approach, right, in that context? So you're taking that sort of broad level, and then we identified some of that as you're doing here, identified some bottom-up issues. Sorry, I think there's a hand up.
Yeah, we'll pass on to Simon McKenzie, who I see has his hand up online.
Quick question. Just wondering, when you talk about the net wholesale market test, but I guess my concern is that given that for the likes generators don't pay, or they pay very little transmission charges, let's say, how do you actually know that it's the best outcome for customers? So you talk about what the test is looking at the wholesale market. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a great outcome for customers. So I guess that was just something, don't need to go into it now, but I think that would be something we need to consider. Whole of system cost.
Sorry, Hunter from Transpower. I just wanted to make one comment, is that vol itself is quite a difficult concept to value, and getting the like $20,000 is what's in the code, but actually making that that number up, getting a handle on what that number is actually quite difficult, and we've given that a go and found that quite difficult to do. We've got very different results in terms of our methodology, whether it's wanting us to accept or willing us to pay type question, that you talk to customers about what they're willing to pay in terms of reliability, or willing to accept in terms of a compensation for an outage. So I think the concept of vol has lots of uncertainty with it. I think that needs to be recognised in the way we do it.
Oh, I agree with you. I wasn't suggesting vol is the right thing. It's just what is the nature of the test.
Yeah, so you're right, the test is structured where there's the least market cost for solutions to core grid upgrades, and then it's the hurdle to the positive net market benefit for connecting generation or end security grid. What you're arguing is there should be something in between. Is that correct?
There should be, well, what potentially arguing is that there should be the potential ability to take into account additional benefits that may arise and may not necessarily purely be in the electricity market. So if we have a transmission solution that may speed up the connection of renewables, but may deliver a similar electricity market benefit, but enables more decarbonisation faster, that can't be taken into account as it currently stands, from our perspective anyway.
Yeah, Simon, the history of a lot of our economic upgrades have been about avoiding higher cost generation outcomes, like not running a lot of thermal on the North Island, so we got the approval to upgrade poultry. Even our current net zero pathways is largely about, well, the first stage is largely about avoiding more displacing thermal on the North Island. If we go to a world where we displace all the thermal and it's all about near zero cross renewables, we just don't know the answer. Well, how does the net market benefit test work when the actual benefits might be around people's ability to electrify their industries and processes and things like that? How do we account for those?
It's a fair question.
And we don't have a question and answer.
Have you seen much thinking done around this by other regulators? It's really tough. In all the countries I mentioned.
Well, I mean, it's a great question because you look at our investment test. So Australia, our investment test compared to Australia, and it's not that different. But I guess the key difference is they have a different approach to system planning. AEMO does the planning, comes up with a least cost. A number of scenarios where they go, okay, how do we deliver on this? What's the lowest cost? So, we're much more market led. We don't do that kind of central planning role, and it's similar in the UK. They have a not two different investment tests, although they give more emphasis to less regrets investments. But again, it's having I think that's now referred to as a future system operator, who's actually the gas and electricity combined. But they, again, look at what are the pathways we need to do, what investments in transmission do we need to do to make those.
I mean, as it stands, there's no deterministic minimum generation surplus. And like there is in the core grid for demand projects. So over time, as that surplus starts to erode, you're probably going to start seeing situations like a couple of years ago where there was no wind, peak electricity demand, and that emergency notice issued by Transpower to share load, which ordinarily would have been water heating load. I think it's about 40% residential demand-ish, and but no one gets compensated for that. So that feedback mechanism is sort of, and the whole industry is in fact not quite there. So that's a fair point.
That's counting some of the benefits. And interesting insight of Australia is they have, in their planning, they have a counterfactual, which is similar to which is if they don't do this, they have to build a very strong gas-fired. Right, so a counterfactual is, imagine we built a gas-fired network instead, therefore renewables. It makes the case for transmission investment for renewables. So that's how we don't solve this. We're just saying, hey,
that's a really interesting reference actually. If you could actually include that for us, that would be really helpful. Funnily enough, this is precisely what we're talking about in the next slide. If I can just move it to the next slide. But no, that's all right. We can just continue on with that. But that's a really interesting counterfactual investment test they used. And what was the premise of the gas? What was the reason for the allocation? How did they decide?
And I'm not an expert on this. I was just reading. So it's the integrated system plan. So the most recent one, I think, was published in July. So I've got a number of attachments to that. But yeah, so the baseline assumption for the counterfactual is no further transmission investments. So only the ones currently in construction are finished. And then they go, okay, how would we meet the demand and the net zero goal if we don't build any more transmission? And my read of it is, what they have in this line is, there would be a lot more combined cycle gas plants being built and a lot more offshore wind close to the cities where the load is. And they use it as a baseline. So they've got about 18, a lot of build and then a lot of avoided fuel costs to compare.
Okay, so it's actually reminds me very similarly of the counterfactual for the DC upgrade back in the mid-2010s, which was premised on diesel plant locating in the North Island to yes, okay, very similar to that. As the counterfactual. The avoided cost of that was used as a benefit to justify the investment, in fact.
Yeah. And don't get us right, that's part of the investment test. So, we're not saying that doesn't necessarily, we can't necessarily do that in our current investment test, but AEMO has a bit more power to say, this is what we need to do, and all this is the clear counterfactual. So it's a bit different from what we're trying to do, which is to still allow the market to solve the generation issue, but providing overlay scenarios of what we think the demand and generation requirements will be.
So as far as like the MB scenario, though, I know with the latest MB scenarios, say latest, but what they're 2019.
Yeah.
Did they have anything close to that as one of the scenarios?
A gas supply?
No, the counterfactual scenario that John and Joel were talking about, which is that in the absence of transmission to accommodate renewables, you would have to build more expensive, for example, diesel, gas-fired, open cycle gas turbine plants around the country to meet demand.
They just have 5 different futures, don't they?
5 different futures.
They don't, some of which now don't clearly align with government policy and direction and decarbonisation is going, but basically you can take those 5 different futures and weight them accordingly in terms of investment. And then in the recent case, we've got our consultant to be able to modify them to bring them more in line to what we think would happen in the next 10 years.
They also don't consider transmission
in the forecast scenarios. No, it's just an energy scenario, right?
Yeah, it has different EV uptake rates and PV and all that sort of shit.
So I guess we have discussed this slide.
Just before we move on, Simon, I see that Andre Botha, okay, for you back to has the question.
Cool. Yep.
Hi guys, thank you very much. Just a question on this investment test. What I'm uncertain about reading Transpower submission to date is what scenario Transpower has actually used. You know what. So it's not clear to me with that significant increase in capex being forecast, what the outcome is that's driving. I mean, one of the challenges we always have is to say, okay, well, there's multiple future outcomes here, multiple scenarios. Each of the scenarios has got a number of sensitivities. The most obvious one for the Auckland network is to what extent EVs will be controlled to charge out of peak. So it's not clear to me what is currently in the, I want to call it investment test for Transpower on what scenario they have adopted or need to adopt. So is that where this conversation is going? I'm just not sure.
I think there's, Andre, I think there's maybe two separate things. So there's the uplift in our RCP4 investment. So that is based on our accelerated electrification scenario. The details of that are set up in CPR, I believe. Yep. So our transmission planning report, which was published alongside our RCP4 consultation. The scenarios we've been using for net zero grid pathways, testing that, are set out in the long list and short list consultation. Is that correct, Mike? Both. Yeah. Both. Yeah. So.
And probably at its heart, our base capex submissions informed by the future, but they're driven to maintain the asset health and service levels of the existing grid. Right, maybe you're only looking at 5-10 years. Our major capital proposals are about the enhancements that are needed to accommodate the different scenarios that play out in the future that require further investment in the grid. So this is really.
I think just on this one, just a couple of things. One, I think it would be good to consider prudency in terms of transmission investment as an evaluation criteria, because I think that's important to consider. And I think the investment test is very much based on an expectation, expected net market benefit, which is like a P50 type, which is not always appropriate, I think, in terms of investment, because you try and mitigating large risks sometimes, which might have small probabilities but huge impacts, and that needs to be taken into account when you're trying to make a good decision, I think, in investment. So yeah.
Andre, I see you have your hand up there.
Yeah, it's just a follow-on question on that question I had is, and sort of relates to the answer that we just got there as well, is, so if I were to go somewhere and see that what risk mitigation, what scenarios specifically support or that the capex being forecast in the submission, I'm just struggling to see where. I mean, you've mentioned a number of documents, but even if you read the planning report, it's not clear to me whether you are anticipating that EVs will be controlled after peak, for instance, if using that example again. So where can one go to say, okay, these are the risks that we're trying to mitigate because we've been deferring asset replacement for a while, and these are the, this is the plans we have to connect to reinforce the system up north to connect more renewable generation from the north. Here are the load scenarios we're planning for each of the distributors. I'm really struggling to find a concise summary of that underpins the specific investment plan being proposed by Transpower in this instance.
So going back to that, so Andre, you're referring to the RCP4 rather than in
yes.
Net Zero Grid pathways. Okay, so that wouldn't. So RCP4 is not governed by the specific investment test for enhancement and development expenditure. So just sort of decomposing, I think what your question is there. So the enhancement part of our RCP4 plans, so those to add added capacity or deal with operational things to develop the grid, currently that's only around 100 million of our RCP4 plan. The majority, so roughly 3.7 billion of the, and that includes OPEX, sorry, of that plan, is around making sure our assets in the right condition. And that is, so that portion of the expenditure is set out in our asset management plan, where what we use there is our asset health indices and metrics where we can, and conditionality report otherwise. In terms of getting at that locational level, we use our engagement with the EDBs on specific programs when we'll do the work, and we have our ongoing individual engagement plans with each of our EDBs and our other generation customers as well, where we talk about the next sort of 2 to 5 years of works in play.
Quite interested. Sorry, go for it, Andre.
Yeah, sorry for just for my own clarity then, if the majority of the investment is driven by asset replacement, if I want to understand where the current risks are in the system due to, because it's quite a step up in that asset replacement spend compared to the RCP3. So how do I understand what has been the strategic thinking behind deferring these replacements if they've been deferred, and now where we have risks to the Auckland network or in the system supplying the Auckland network, if I can be vector centric for a minute, and just understand what's the strategy behind that, to sort of get clarity on that.
Andre, the overarching thing for the, and the Commission can correct this here, for the RCP4 submission, that's our base CapEx, is about service levels, right? What's the overall service level that's required of the grid today that needs to be sustained, put aside any enhancements? So as part of that, we've consulted on the service levels, and the Commission will too, that customers expect of the grid. The RCP4 proposal was about meeting those service levels. What level of asset investment do we need according to our asset health, criticality and other frameworks to ensure that the grid provides the level of service that customers effectively want through the service measures that we are held to account on.
But I think just to add to that, Andre, we're more than happy to set up a meeting between us and Vector or any other EDBs who are interested to go through our asset management planning process, and we can then get the right people to go into a bit more detail around what our planned work is around the Auckland area or the Waikato area, or what we need to get into.
Thank you.
Just in the interest of time, I think we need to move on from the investment test evaluation criteria. So I'll hand over to Simon to move on.
Thanks, Nation. So the next topic of discussion is the unquantified cost benefits, or the unquantifiable cost benefits, which ordinarily in a net market benefit test would be used to discern between two very similar options or three very similar options. Usually they're either too expensive to quantify, too much time and effort, or they're just not able to be assigned a number, and you give them some sort of directional sense. So one of Transpower's views is that the range should be, the threshold should be changed, and probably I think in previous discussions about other projects, the nature of the difference should be also changed as well. Not just that it's the difference between project costs, but it might be something else. So pretty keen to hear from Transpower about views about the unquantified cost and benefits, because the grid investment test is a very specific quantifiable analytic tool. It's you analyse and estimate it as best you can. It's an estimate. Like power system analysis is an estimate. All is an estimate. Even the core grid, which is an N-1 based on the least cost solution based on a default of that was done way back in 2007, 2000. Yeah. So it's been there for a while. So yeah, quite keen for Transpower to within the framework of this uncertainty to discuss this particular mechanism in the grid investment test.
Yeah. So I think on this one, our point here is actually starting off with the 10%, so as you've highlighted here, allows Transpower to propose alternatives to the 10%. I think our concern is that creates a anchor. So, we have to justify why it's higher than that, and we'll disrespect everyone in the room, you'll still be brought back to that 10% anchor. Our point is when we're looking at different projects, if it's an economic base one, and depending where it is, we might have more or less competition level effects. So rather than starting with the anchor, we think 10%, we think it's just probably, it would give us more flexibility to say, look, something along the principle line of Transpower can include unquantified benefits, and they would need to justify the size of those benefits with reference to qualitative evidence. So, it might be in some cases we think it could be 30% competition benefits because of the capacity we're opening up, and in other cases, if we've got better certainty around cost or something, might be only 5 or 10% in this case. So it's just to provide a bit more flexibility. Is that how yeah.
I think, so at the moment it's linked to cost, as you're alluding to, that 10%.
Yeah, it's very, very clearly defined, and it's based on cost differences.
Yeah, so if you've got a relatively low investment case, that is actually quite a small sliver. Really, that 10% of anyone has $3 million, which is, I think, quite small. And I think too, the benefit uncertainty is can be quite significant. Benefits are all calculated on forecasts. Forecasts are uncertain, and I guess that's particularly the case in the transition that we were sort of seeing in terms of pace and change. So it does become. It doesn't give us much opportunity in some cases to step back and say what's the wider picture, what are the other big drivers that are going on in terms of other potentially big benefits that are very difficult to quantify in any way, but it's strategically important.
So I guess the main question would be for comparison of options on transmission solutions, how unquantified benefits would be different between them. That's kind of a question, right? That would have to be defined by Transpower. What unquantified benefit would discern one transmission solution over another? Because that's really the key. Because I think you're trying to work out the least cost solution or whatever. And 2 options or 3 options might be the same in an NPV sense.
Yeah.
So how do you discern between them with an unquantified cost of benefit that somehow is different between one transmission solution to another? Is the main question, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think some of that requires some judgment and the ability to do that. And you could have a very low cost option versus much more expensive option being compared against each other.
Right.
And if that cheap option is setting the net benefit, then the comparison that you can make is relatively small or similar in terms of that net benefit.
Okay. Would you see any potentially changes to process itself? I mean, sort of that idea of heavily weighting an option that has quite high unquantified benefits versus an option that has quantified, and how we perhaps can get comfort with that. So, I'm thinking whether or not additional sort of consultation is required with industry, perhaps, to really sort of pick through that weighing that Transpower is doing. Sort of quite a challenging sort of judgment to make when you're talking about something that's estimatable versus that sort of very challenging unquantified sort of.
I think if it could be done through the existing process, that would be efficient.
When we're talking about unquantified benefits like competition benefits and providing confidence to investors, etc., the level of the amount of trying to quantify those things is just fraud, because you need to make all sorts of assumptions about participant behaviour in the future and things like that, which is why we treat them as unquantified benefits. But I take the point that it would, if we make a statement that we think there's an unquantified benefit, I think it would be reasonable for the Commission to consult on that point and seek others' opinions.
That's an interesting point about competition benefits. Like, how would we calculate competition benefits? I don't think anyone's ever done it here in New Zealand yet. Would it be perhaps constraint of generation, or a lack of retail competition, or?
That's part of the difficulty, isn't it? Is how do you reasonably do that? We did have a go for the Pole 3 analysis. We justified Pole 3, but it was very difficult, and we still had to make a lot of assumptions about future market participant behaviour, which is
you need a lot of information about portfolios and where load and generation is, and to try and make some determinations of how people want to compete in different generators want to compete in different areas, which is challenging.
I see that Richard Sharp would like to comment on this.
Hi, Richard.
I'd just like to ask, to what extent are those benefits verified independently, and also the assumptions that underpin the calculations of those benefits or determination of those benefits, also how, to the extent that they are independently verified?
I mean, I guess through the independent verification, it would be the putting out there what our assumptions are, and then our calculations of cost and benefits, and the Commission consulting on those, and giving all stakeholders a chance to provide comment on it. I mean, we try and do obviously peer review internally as much as possible, but we're not necessarily going out there and getting an independent view on all our assumptions before consulting on those or putting our proposal into the Commission.
And in fact, it can be part of the long and shortlisting process as we do already. So, if we are going to put some of those benefits down in an unquantified way, let's get the opinions of the people who end up bearing the costs and benefits of the particular proposal to provide their feedback.
Yeah, and I think the good thing about that consultation process, Transpower is generally a bit risk averse as well. We don't want to go out there and have a large benefit in there that we try and slip through anything like that, because the Commission will pick up on that, and if that derails our investment proposal, then that's quite massive for us. We don't want to spend a year and a half coming up with a MCP application to be derailed because we've got a benefit in there that stakeholders are unhappy with.
I guess we've seen that.
I do feel though that not all stakeholders that are submitting into those consultation processes maybe have the same level of sophistication. So therefore, an independent verification report sort of helps get good quality submissions into those processes, because it helps with the understanding. So I would encourage some form of independent verification when trying to quantify benefits such as these you're talking about.
I'd say we've seen the benefit. I guess Transpower has seen the benefit of the independent verifier and the RCP proposals, and that could be an avenue for providing confidence to the sort of customers and ourselves as we sort of evaluate proposals.
So Richard, can I ask a follow-up question of yourself?
Certainly.
This independent verification report for CapEx IM major CapEx proposals, where would you prefer it to be slotted into the process? Would it be where Transpower consults on a long list, short list, or the proposal itself, or in fact the Commission's review of that proposal?
I probably have to think about it, but probably earlier on in the process I think would be preferable. So it can be sort of referred to as you go through those consultation steps, but we'll give it a little bit more.
It's an interesting idea. Yeah, thank you.
Can I just clarify that we're talking about the unquantified benefits and whether they exist?
Well, I think we were just generally talking about cost and benefits overall. In support of any proposal, I think it morphs into that discussion. So I imagine that would be part of it. Yeah.
interesting to see how that works in a world where we may have quite a few more major capital proposals, and whether there's a complexity factor, and to the extent that they deviate from the black and white and have more unquantified and flexible things involved.
Certainly worth considering, right? It may, in fact, if we look at the IPP process, how the verification has reduced friction, improved assessments, improved proposals. I think it's worth considering. Okay, so cracking on. So there's two specific investment test topics here: the sensitivity and scenarios. We can talk about both are sort of needed for two different reasons. With the sensitivity analysis, more about testing economic robustness of the solutions, whereas scenarios is more about the technical robustness of the solution Transpower's proposing. So Transpower's made some comments around a lot of the sensitivity analysis probably not being necessary, perhaps, or being a little bit too prescriptive. Early views would be, the cost benefit framework, the sensitivity analysis is sort of like part of it, especially in an uncertain environment, and it's been working for, I think it's been embedded since 2004, 2005. So what's not working now would be a key question. What has changed about the situation that makes sensitivity analysis too much of an impost on Transpower's analysis?
Yeah. So I think, to be clear, the point we're getting at here is not that we don't disagree with sensitivity analysis. Like, we absolutely agree with sensitivity analysis. I think it's just that the IAMs are quite prescriptive on the ones we have to undertake. And we think in some situations there are better sensitivities that we should undertake. Running the process of modelling all these, if we're doing the required set plus the other set, it sort of expands and expands. And if our view is, well, actually these other sensitivities that we have run are more appropriate than some of the ones specified, it's just can we save some time there and get agreement on these are the types of sensitivities we'd run, and let's not run all the ones that are as prescribed for the IM. So I think, again, it's sort of shifting back. The Commission expects Transpower to run all reasonable and appropriate scenarios to be commensurate with the investment proposal, but not necessarily specify exactly all the ones in there. So I'll have to see if you can add on that.
That's exactly right.
So
NZIR made the point in responding to our shortlist consultation that there wasn't a lot of variation. Sorry, this is for NZGP1 today. There wasn't a lot of variation in the sensitivities that we reported, but we reported the standard list, maybe there are other sensitivities maybe there are other things we could have sensitised which would be more relevant to that.
So you're proposing that we add a flexibility to Transpower to add sensitivity analysis where that's appropriate in a particular situation. My reading of the rules at the moment is that you can apply the listed sensitivities that are reasonably practical or necessary. So there is flexibility there for Transpower to argue that we don't have to apply all of them for these reasons. But you're arguing that you would prefer it if there was some flexibility around adding some that seem appropriate.
No, so our read of the IAMs is that we have to do the sort of base set, and then our point is, well, we are doing those base sets now, but for some investments it may not be appropriate to do all those. There may be better ones. So rather than having like 15 sensitivities, it's just going, let's look at what is a set of reasonable sensitivities based on the investment type.
Okay, I think we're agreeing about that. That's clear. Yeah, that's clear. Yeah. Thank you. So unless anyone's got any questions about sensitivity analysis, I'll move on to scenarios. So this kind of links back to the. So you kind of in the power system world would do scenarios to test robustness of a technical solution, to stress test the proposed solution, I guess, and see if it's robust to a variety of outcomes. And your point here is that the way the CapEx IM stands at the moment, it requires you to do any variations you propose and the ME scenarios, which may or may not be out of date. And you would like flexibility around to be able to choose and to argue why. Is that my distillation of your point?
Yeah.
So you want the flexibility to be able to choose scenarios for a particular situation and to make the argument or make the case that why this is appropriate.
Yeah. So at the moment there's 5 MB edges scenarios, and from a modelling perspective, like it's very multiplicative. So if you've got 5 options, you've got 5 scenarios, that's 25 cases that you need to go through. You've got all your sensitivity analysis to do. So very quickly, your analysis is going like that to sort of for a case. And I think in some cases that might be appropriate to test those scenarios. Might be testing your uncertainty, and in some cases, say for a smaller like regional investment, which is largely driven by demand, you might just a high, medium, and low sort of demand scenario might be sort of sufficient to get sort of the coverage. And so, and also, I think because in some cases it might be the case that we want to consider an alternative scenario completely from what's an edges scenario in the investment test, because there's various other scenarios that the industry develops and supports, but we haven't got any flexibility to do that.
So it's my understanding that the edges scenarios, they're just energy scenarios, right, with a very loosely defined mix of generation type in each year.
Yeah.
Are they so out of date that the actual generation that's on the network at the moment means that they're not useful at all? Or I mean, you have discretion to locate the generation where you see fit, right? When you do the STDP runs.
I think they're useful, and I think they're useful for some of the macro assumptions that go into our modelling. We're comfortable. We take those sort of macro assumptions and then put them into, I guess, translate them into a version that we can run models on at a GXP level. So they're useful from that perspective. That's what most scenarios are. They're sort of at that level.
It might help people to understand the type of analysis you have to do. Like we know STDP runs, we can talk about that in those terms, but I don't think people understand really the actual analytical impost that the runs do add. So for each scenario, for example, for a 20-year forecast, how long would it take to do that?
How long would it take to do the modelling?
Just for one scenario, power system out 20 years using all the hydro inflow sequencing to generate sort of fuel displacement cost benefits.
The modelling is very detailed because it goes down to a GXP level, and then it has all the generation. We're at the moment with NZGP, we're also developing expansion plans in terms of what new generation gets built. And then we basically run a dispatch model going out 20 or 30 years, processing time. And we're also starting to model down at a half-hourly level so that we can take into account intermittency within how the generation mix is varying with wind and solar and sort of intermittent generation now. So that's, I think as soon as you just say STDP, you're talking at least a couple of weeks probably, to set up, and then as I said, like it's a multiplicative. You've got 25. You might. I think we had 150 cases that we were running for the last run of STDP. So it's it's a huge undertaking, and just the IT. We struggle storing results.
That half-hour demand assumption, that must add a massive amount of processing requirement. Like, what is that? Like, I think it used to be like a five setting load assumption.
Yeah, load blocks.
Load blocks.
Yeah.
What's the difference between? Have you tested the difference between making that assumption and using the half-hour data? on the outputs? Like, is
It's
it
hourly, so I should actually, I should have said hourly. rather
yeah,
than
like, does it make an actual difference, or is it just within the?
Andrew, I think it's important with renewables and intermittent generation now.
Exactly.
So if you want to capture the benefits of intermittent and variable generation, we have to do it more granularly. The New Zealand battery project's also been using a lot of STDP as well, and they've found the same. In fact, they've done a bit of development. So hence, as opposed to conventional hydro, which STDP is really good at, and thermal, we're finding to get the true benefits of adding renewables, we need to do more granular modelling.
So it is quantifiably different.
Yes, it's picking up the variabilities of solar, wind, etc. on an hourly basis.
Yeah, the other option would be to change to another modelling package, but other modelling packages aren't as good with our hydro base. So yeah.
Practically, what we're finding at the moment is that actually expansion plan modelling is taking a long time because you've got a lot of fairly homogeneous type generation projects that like the costs are similar.
Yeah.
So it's taking a reasonable while to solve that problem because it's got lots of choices. And then you sort of work down. You start doing like a monthly with load blocks to develop a policy for how you're going to run the water, and then it goes down into the hourly model that sort of sees how it runs at a regular level. But yeah, it's a big modelling problem.
It is, and it depends how many transmission options you want to evaluate as well. With the NZGP1 analysis we're just completing, our final set of options was 18. So for every scenario you had to do it 18 times, and it does add a lot. The other thing with the MBIE scenarios is that not specific to the edges, but we're starting to see a whole lot of possible futures which aren't certain enough yet to necessarily include in our analysis, but the likes of Lake Onslow and Taranaki offshore wind and things like that are scenarios that may become relevant, and we'd like to study them. But at the moment, if they're not reflected in the edges scenarios, the MBIE scenarios, then we're limited in how we can reflect any analysis. And things are changing very quickly. As we know, the MBIE scenarios were developed in 2019 when the likes of Lake Onslow and Taranaki offshore wind were much less certain than they are even now. They're still not certain enough to include in our analyses, but things are changing quickly, so some flexibility in that area would be useful.
Sort of heard earlier from, I think it was Andre, maybe around consistency of scenarios, and obviously Victor and other EDBs are doing a lot of forecasting themselves, and it's changing really quickly. How do you see yourselves taking that into account, or can it be taken into account in your modelling? Obviously there is the ability to vary the edges scenarios. Do you sort of ensure there's consistency with some of the generators to the extent they're doing forecasting, or the load customers?
I think that for the load customers, the key thing is their own forecast, right? So how up to date they are. So it's great that Victor and others, EDBs, are doing work on their forecasting, but to date that's been a challenge for us. So just in our last TPR, I think we had a step change of over 700 megawatts from EDBs compared to the previous year as they start to grapple with electrification. So I guess our demand forecasting has had to have a bit of a top-down, bottom-up approach. So to make sure that on the core grid, we're actually picking the right investments. We're not underbaking things because EDBs have yet to be able to forecast out to 2035 or 2040. Equally, we're not overcooking things because a particular EDB hasn't accounted for the benefits of DER or something like that, and therefore has a very high forecast. So we're really committed to working with EDBs, and great. I think they've got an initiative now to better align their load forecasting.
So that you said 700 megawatts would be demand increase
Out to 2030 or 2035?
2035.
Yeah. Just a change from one year to another.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
A lot of that is step
Between the 2021 TPR and the 2022 TPR, and going out to the EDBs for their forecast, it was a 700 megawatt difference, so which is great. It means they're realising the impact of electrification on their distribution businesses.
So it's either that or RCPD disappearing.
It's true.
There could be some of that, right?
There could be some of that. There has been a degree of research done by ECA and others, and that's probably more in the 100 to 200 megawatt range at most, and it's obviously a one-off step. Yeah.
Be interesting to get that stat as well.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, I think we have a standard
slide on it.
slide on it.
Yeah, that's right.
There's some of that on our TPR too.
Oh, there is? Yes. Yeah. Just pointing in the right direction. Yeah, be great. Thanks. Patient, how are we doing for time?
I think we'll need to move on to onto the investment value.
So if there's no other questions about scenario modelling as it affects the grid investment test, I'll move on. So just have some questions here about some points made. And it kind of overlaps with some of the stuff we've just previously talked about. None of this stuff is in isolation, right? There all seem to be the same thing about uncertainty and investment test. And one of the points you made is that the present investment test could take into account the value of the investment. I'm quite unclear about what exactly you meant there. Was it the P50 cost of the proposal? Was it the modelling of the actual capital investments over the 20-year period?
I think on this one, it was more about the when we're looking at the options, we can have a broad range. You can look at small tactical ones to much larger investments. The requirement is, particularly in the evaluation, is that the Commission choose the most net beneficial one. And I think what we're finding, because of that broad range of uncertainty, we're trying to look at it from a least regrets approach as well. So you may have a smaller investment which may be slightly more net beneficial, but your slightly larger investment may actually open up more opportunities in future or mitigate risks of not having the capacity at the right time. So it was, again, just going back to that evaluation flexibility. Is there a way that we have the evaluation such that the Commission could look at it from that lens of saying, Transpower has identified these tactical investments, however, actually building a line slightly earlier will open up this range of opportunities, but in terms of a net benefit taken at this time, it's not the most net beneficial. So we're not saying let's go with negative beneficial ones. It's still got to be positive, but it's just when we compare those, the value of the investments, take into account the uncertainty around whether exactly the timing of it and the longer term risk mitigations it might have. So you're going to previous points made by my countries.
Does this sort of interact at all with say, the unquantified benefits? So, for example, if you're able to take into account unquantified benefits for that long-term investment, that would get it over the line.
So it's quite definitive, right? I mean, we asked that the proposal is a P50 cost estimate. It's quite clearly defined. And there's no estimate of risk around those costs that we approve. So, I guess the risk is the P50. I'm still a bit unclear about how you think this might work.
It's the comparative value of those investments. So yes, if we've got one investment and it may or may not have large cost uncertainty, one investment which is delivering a net benefit of 50 million, and then another, and that's the cost of that investment is, let's say 100 million capex. Then we have a much bigger one, 300, 400 million capex investment, but the net benefit is down at 40 million. But that investment actually provides a whole lot of additional capacity, but it's not going to be utilised until later. So the benefits are discounted more. But because of the uncertainty, we might want to go, well, you've got this forward-looking investment. Is it better to pick that one over the smaller, slightly higher net beneficial project?
So a similar example might be if you've got an area where you're doing a package of things, you can we might have some small investments that have very high benefits, but only as a result of problems for a short period of time. Right? And the ability to package and say, well, actually, we take several steps together, they have a much higher overall benefit, even if they're not the most, in percentage terms, the most highest net positive benefit. That makes sort of, so he's still getting positive benefits, right? But you're enabling a bigger package of work rather than sort of doing an incremental bit here, and then you're sort of having to come back later and remake a case based on what the next stages are, just because you're picking the one that has the overall highest percentage net benefit.
So, can I ask a question? If you have a higher cost investment that has much higher benefit, will it not show in the investment test?
It may have higher costs as well. It's
Yeah.
Positive, yeah.
But it should show up, right, in the investment test. So, where's the problem?
Well, it may not be the highest net beneficial investment.
Net.
Can I ask-
It might show the higher benefit, but not the highest benefit.
Yeah, correct.
Is it possible that you perhaps like create a dummy example for us to demonstrate what it is you're talking about here? Like two options, precisely what you're saying here. Show us the time value. Is it too difficult to do, or
No.
you must be talking about a real world example?
I think you could, for instance, let's say you could pick a transmission line where you could do a tactical upgrade, right?
Yep.
Has a very high benefit, right? The RT reactor, for instance, right? And that was progressed in isolation. But we now have industry participants saying, well, actually, you probably need to think about a second line into Waireki. Right? So what if we were able to package together, we've made the investment of the reactor, tactical upgrade to the existing transmission line and the new transmission line, if overall they have quite a very high positive benefit, but not the highest net benefit compared to the cost. Does that help? Yeah. Otherwise, you do the first investment, you lose all the benefits of the little increment, and then you're sort of back to, at some later date, trying to make a case for the bigger increment when it's needed.
Very good for us to see some numbers.
Sorry.
Yeah. Good for us to see some numbers. I think I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it would be good for us to see some numbers.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think the justification is probably the detail to see how it plays out.
But it can come back to, how you weight your scenarios. If you put your 100% rate on we need the capacity, then your bigger investment's going to come out as more net beneficial. So, we've got to work out the right balance around that because of the uncertainty. We can't just say that will happen. And that's when you come back to sort of looking at it from a least regrets perspective.
In these sorts of situations, are you saying that it's inevitable that bigger investment will have to be made eventually? Because I guess that's the worries that you're sort of building a hell of a lot earlier when you're not certain that it's going to be needed. And you're really trying to understand that there is some certainty around the need, but it is further down the track.
And the balance might be that we have the approval. Obviously, we'll do the initial tactical projects. We would start on the process of, as we know, building new lines aren't easy, right? And obviously, we've still got we've at least got a mandate from the Commission, which is really important in terms of getting resource consents and things like that. But we've still got the ability to come back and do an output amendment if the world changes and say, hey, going ahead with the new line is not the right, in this case, it's not the right answer.
And that's not just us, I guess. The example John used there, the Waireki ring, is out of consultation. It was a comment that came out of the consultation round of our shortlist of NZGP1.
There's that whole concept of least regrets in there as well. Some of those investments in terms of you may have situations where it's highly valuable to have that larger option in place. In some situations where it might not be, but if you don't have it, you've got a problem. Just to take some of that into account in decision making.
I know we'll touch on the staging process a little bit later on, but do you see that being a solution here, and that you get this sort of okay for the long term, and perhaps to go away to do some of the design and the consenting, those sorts of bits and pieces, which you do need an overall approval, but do you see a challenge with the sort of upfront approval even then to get the go ahead on a staged approach?
Yeah, probably as a separate subset, which we'll come to, but one of the things on our mind, it's 15, 20 years, at least 15 so since we built a transmission line, and for a project like that, there's a sort of circularity of, it's a huge stakeholder engagement to do. We want to do it a lot better than we did in 2005, and the process of talking to stakeholders, gradually broadening your conversation from councils to landowners at some point, and receiving designations of consent, obviously at some point a degree of regulatory backing that there is this need and it's likely to be required. So that's I'm probably playing into a staged investment discussion, but just how we mature the arrangement so that we can, because obviously if the regulatory approval is too late, the land purchase costs might be a lot higher or things like that. So it's just it's needed for compliance certainty, if you like, with the resource management process, but also getting approval or approval in principle at the right time may also help lower the overall cost of the project.
Yeah, so just in the interest of time, we only have time to take one more question from Greg Skelton online, and just as a reminder to those in the audience, speak up for the benefit of those attending online. I think we're having a bit of trouble picking up some of the audio.
Thanks. Go ahead, Greg. Got a question?
Yeah.
I'd just like to ask the Commission what their thoughts are on capacity headroom around connection assets. And this sort of stems back to impact on consumers. And we're starting to see in the Wellington area some pretty chunky demand loads coming on, ferry electrification around 10 megawatts, and 30%. But also other businesses getting into electrification pretty early, which again is taking capacity headroom right away. What we've seen over the last 5 years is the need to upgrade GXP transformers. Now they're going through potentially another upgrade. Now, that to a customer is a pass-through cost, but unfortunately, if the capacity that's required and projected to the future is short-sighted, then that transformer capacity that GXP is probably going to be changed out 3 or 4 times over the life of the asset, which from a customer's point of view is a pretty high cost compared to taking a higher capacity at the first change.
Could you just repeat that part again, Greg? I think your audio, could you just repeat what you said before? Your audio just cut out before.
Yeah, it's just the idea behind getting the capacity headroom for new assets a lot larger going forward than the incremental capacity headroom of what prior load projections might have been. It's just the step changes in electrification are very large compared to what they've been in the past.
Greg, that's a really good point from a Transpower perspective. We are very aware of that. We've already worked with a customer in the South Island to bring forward the replacement of some near end of life transformers by 5 years to replace them with ones that have about 2.5 times the capacity of the ones that are there at the moment to enable their load. As part of our, already today, obviously, when connection assets start to come to end of life, we will replace it with the modern electrical equivalent. That's part of the regime. But between ourselves and the customer, we can agree to pay an additional amount, or the customer pay an additional amount for a larger transformer. We might have to work on the GRS, which is a bit of a rule on that, but that's possible. In our RCP4 submission, we are putting a case for a specific bundle of money for enabling electrification, with a view that that would give us a greater ability when there's a likely evident need to replace an asset as it's coming towards the end of life with something that's significantly larger. But we welcome submissions as part of our RCP4 package on our ability to do that.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if that's going to be sufficient though, because when you look at the staging of some of these demands, if you pick the Kaiwhara substation, that has no headroom capacity left, basically because Kiwi Rail have put in a ferry that's going to have 30% batteries. So they'll go to 100% some stage in the future because they're modular. But it's just the timing of when those step changes are going to be made and thinking about what is the capacity movement away, because I think there's some thinking that needs to change from what it might have been in the past.
I guess we are interested in that prudency point, you know, and seeing the sort of demand scenarios that businesses are sort of considering. And that's just really important for us when we're considering investments.
I think on that one, like usually the additional capacity is cheap relatively, and say putting in another new big transformer at some later time, the additional headroom can be quite relatively cheap.
Yeah, so Hunter's point, so we'll be, if it was, Kaiwhara side, if it was a near end life, we'll be replacing our base capex anyway, so people will be paying a capital charge for GPM. So that's paid $10 million to upgrade the transformer. To make it twice as big is only another $2 or $3 million, which the customer would fund under an agreement with Transpower. So certainly there's no better time to increase capacity than when Transpower comes along and says our connection transformer is getting towards the end of life.
Unfortunately, I think we'll have to wrap up that discussion and move on to the next point.
So what we could do actually is perhaps take a break now, kick this to enable Hazard Hazard has to leave at 11. So pardon me, Matt will do it. Okay, sure. Okay, well, change that. We will talk about this. So these are just some minor clause issues that we just want to work through just to get more clarity on what it is that Transpower, the point Transpower is making. The first of these is about clause 321 in the CapEx line, which talks about the which is about the base CapEx and the consultation requirements around base CapEx. So I just wanted, if Transpower could just clarify what it means by the definition should be clarified. Be a bit more specific about that.
Yeah, so this is just around our programs and projects. So yeah, 3.2.1 requires us to consult on any program or project over 20 million. I think in hindsight, when we put our submission on this, we might have been a bit stronger and say we may not need clause 3.2.1 full stop, but I'll cover the questions on this first. So why clarity would be good on this? Because the programs can encapsulate a whole lot of stuff. So we refer to our tower painting program as a program. And we, it's part of our RCP4 proposal, but, do we need to go out and consult on that specifically when it starts? Because the requirements are before we start these things. So it's just, if we are doing something during price control that wasn't set out in our RCP4 proposal, do we then need to go out and consult on that? So we've had a couple of instances recently. Well, there was the Penrose, which is a bit older, but we had the HVDC. We did some work on the HVDC, and we'd already consulted with the main impacted customers via the outage protocol, which we have under the industry code. But then under this clause, we then had to reconsult more widely. So we put out a consultation piece and do that, and then we didn't actually get any feedback besides the two we'd already consulted on, who said, you've already consulted with us on this, go ahead and do it. And so there's sort of the step back question. If we're consulting on our programs and projects as part of RCP4, and we are incentivized under RCP4 to look for the most efficient and prudent solution, there's just that question for us. Well, do we need this subsequent consultation on this? And then the exact point was just that clarification. Is a program two projects on the same line, even though they're distinct, or do we treat those as two separate projects? So, we have to go through that kind of consideration as well internally. We might be working on a line and it might be over 2 or 3 years and dealing with 2 different towers. Do we need to consult on that, or because combined they come over 20 million, or do we just say, well, that's one project and that's another project?
And it was approved in our base CapEx.
And it was approved in our base CapEx anyway.
Slight complication is always going to be as TPM. So under TPM, any program of work over currently $20 million, we have to consult on the pricing outcomes of it as part of making a commitment to that work, but that's separate from here. So in a way, there's not necessarily a consultation on the need, but through the TPM, there's a consultation on these are the pricing outcomes to the extent that that provides anything as well.
And then just on the next point, we have to, the requirement is, I can't remember precisely where, but saying commensurate with net market benefits test for, for any work which is over 20 million in project or program. So, if we're going out to replace or redo a substation that's over 20 million, actually doing a net market benefits test for that doesn't really make sense. We've got to go and, repair this substation. If it's for asbestos, we've just got to kind of do it. So actually having a requirement of us doing a net, to run through a net electricity market benefit seems pretty excessive. I think, again, it'll be something, the consult commensurate is fine if we leave it in, but it's, Transpower should provide analysis commensurate with the project it is consulting or something like that. So, we obviously should provide enough information for our stakeholders to provide feedback on, but providing a net electricity market benefit analysis on a substation repair replacement may not be appropriate.
I presume this sort of links back to the asset health modelling and risk, which is a relatively good link to be able to make now. The Transpower probably couldn't make 5 years ago in an analytical sense.
And that should give the Commission some confidence that we've reached that level of maturity.
Yeah.
We've had a GHT do their independent verification, which if we haven't, we'll share with you on that. So that should, base CapEx work, that should be helpful.
Yeah, you've now got that nice check on us. So you've got the service measures on in terms of what's the outturn, but then you've also got that underlying leading factor of the asset health that you are monitoring already, but you'll have more to monitor during RCP4.
So can I request that as part of your written feedback to us, you pitch up an alternative to what that should look like? That would be quite useful. I guess the last question here is about the general evaluation criteria and the statement that there's factors that's complicated to understand and apply. I just wanted to understand which ones were complicated and what way they were complicated.
I guess it's just it's kind of a blanket evaluation criteria to everything you assess. So we put this schedule to the IV to go through our plans and assess, but I'm pretty sure it has that must tick all these boxes. And again, going back to this example that we've got a particular project, well, does it need to actually tick all these boxes? Is the general requirement, Transpower should be following good electricity industry practice? Factors that the IV and the Commission might consider are along these lines, but not have that, explicit, they have to tick all these boxes. A similar thing when we had our Section 53 ZD notice around the OPEX evaluation you undertake, because OPEX is, there's a heck of a lot of prescription there of things we need to tick off. Some of those, and maybe all of them are right for certain programs or projects work, and then for other programs, there's just a couple of things that should be ticked off, and it's just getting that balance right.
So these are the considerations that the Commission had regard to. Yes. And so the verifier has to test against these. Did the verifier give you feedback that some of this was hard for them to? There was a verification feedback.
Yeah. So I wasn't directly involved with RCP3, but just if you just go through what the report has versus what the actual ticks off, they don't explicitly tick off all the requirements. And, you know, I guess it's not quite covering ours, but it's just making sure that we don't get caught out because, you know, for a particular program, we haven't done every single thing, because actually under GEEP, it's not appropriate to do, you know, all those things.
I think, you know, looking at this 5 years ago, I would have said the difficulty might have been linking to the grid output targets and the quality measures. Everything else is more like policy procedures top down, and how the supply bottom up. Given that the asset health modelling and network risk modelling is quite mature, do you think maybe the verifier coming may not have so much of a problem with this, given that
potentially,
you can make those linkages now?
Yeah. So what we'll do is, we'll go through it in a bit more detail now with the asset health, and we'll specifically highlight any ones in A1 that might be cause an issue.
Okay, so can I ask if anyone's got any questions about the minor clause issues we've just discussed? Otherwise, we'll take a break.
Can I? Oh, so just before we move on, there are other might refer to as minor clause issues, but they have more consequential impact. You obviously selected, a few issues here to discuss today, but there were other ones we've raised.
There were others.
Yeah,
but
the
these
base
are the ones
CapEx.
we don't have enough information on to bring.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have added that at the front. That
I think it was
work
mentioned, I
going
just
on
wanted-
parallel.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Is there any questions about that small session there? We'll take a break. Come back. Sure, cool. Okay. We'll take a break till, I think, what, 10 to? See you all back at 10:50.
Yeah. So the first one on the right past
All right. So we'll have a bit of a break from some of the investment test nuts and bolts, and keen to just have a discussion around, I guess, the MCP process, and I guess how uncertainty gets managed by Transpower, given there is a hell of a lot of uncertainty around generation and demand at the moment, and that can make it very difficult to, I guess, identify what is the right investment at the right time. So I guess, you know, staging was introduced 4 years ago at the last CapEx IM review. Yeah, 2018. And you know, I guess that was put in place to try to manage some of these uncertainties, so that you know, Transpower can get better certainty around potentially the level of funding or need and the timing of a particular project. I guess an observation has been that, from me anyway, over the last few years, is that there has been a bit of uncertainty about when is the right time to use staging, and from that point of view, quite keen to just sort of understand where perhaps we could improve the clarity around the staging process. You know, I know Transpower's suggested some clarification and identified that the AER, for instance, provides some guidelines. Just quite keen to understand some of the challenges or I guess lack of clarity that Transpower's sort of seen over the last few years, and where we can sort of add some clarity or certainty to improve the staging process.
Let's lead off on that. I can lead off, and I'll pass my colleague.
All right. I see the scene in terms of looking forward about how you facilitate long lead investments like new lines, where it's not only about the generation bill, it's also how do you interact with the consent process, so how does you get enough of a regulatory mandate at the right phase that then when you go for your designations and consents and start working with landowners, you're in a position where you've got someone else who said, yes, there is a need here, and that could help actually deliver a project more efficiently as well, because you're not leaving it too late to work with landowners who see you coming and therefore want any amount of money, and also would help deal with the costing, right? That obviously when you're seeking approval early on, you don't have you have an indicative idea, but you don't have a great idea what land costs and that. So building staging in a way, in that case, to allow us to work together to refine the cost of the final proposal as well.
Yeah, I think, I wasn't there, but what I understand, I think we were all on the same page in 2018 as to what staging was the intent of putting it in. But you know, there's you know, some specifications in the CapEx IM that may be different reads from Commission versus Transpower, but you know, we sort of read it and we go, you know, if there's a must requirement in there, we go, well, we need to provide all the information again for the second stage. And obviously our view, well, not obviously, but our view on the staging was to let's get the benefits and intent in place, and then let's give a bit more flexibility to get more certainty around costs or around the exact design, but to provide us with enough certainty to kick off the project and to do that kind of work. And so I think, yeah, when we read it, we go, well, actually, as it currently stands in the IM, it probably doesn't save us any time or admin burden across the piece. And you're just looking at whether there are issues in the IM itself or whether it is just a guidance around, look, and I think we need a straw person probably to do a straw person around a transmission line, because that's going to be the real test of it when you're talking about, 5-10 year kind of lead time. But even these shorter lead time projects for NZGP, particularly with the supply chain issues going on, but getting prices on, particularly in equipment, a kit for investments. We've got the requirement to put a P50, and that provides some confidence. But is that, given the level of uncertainty we're dealing with, it could be 50% different price variation. Is there a better way to protect consumers and Transpower by saying, well, look, let's go back to the Commission in 4 months' time and say, we've now got a price. We're still net, the option is still net beneficial. The cost is within 20%. The overall cost of the project is within 10-20%. can the commission kind of go, okay, we accept your new cost variation. This is how the MCA major capital allowance will be set. So it's just, can we build out a sort of streamlined process? And you mentioned Australia. It's changing a bit at the moment, from my understanding, but they did used to have that process where the costs were allowed to be refined, and it would go back to the AER, but the AER wasn't required to do a full consultation back on it. It would just assess, are the new costs sufficient? Does it still pass the test? I think it's changing slightly, or at least there's a rule change proposal to say, look, it has to be within 10% for the AER to be able to do that. If it's over 10% of the total cost, then the AER must go back out and consult. And it's just, is there something around there that we can do to build those stages up to say, well, if it's a 30 million piece of kit and you've got a $300 million project and the variation is 50%, can we just propose to the commission, look, this is the more efficient pricing 3 months down the track? Can you just not tick it off, but can the commission just do the assessment and approve it without us having to then, start from stage one and go, well, here's our long list options, short list options, it still passes all the tests?
Yeah, that would be really useful to, and written sort of feedback after this to get a picture of what those sort of scenarios or process could possibly look like. Because I guess that's what I'm hearing as much as anything. It might be that the subsequent staging and how that looks, has the staging that we've put in place streamlined that at all, or is it sort of just actually really still multiple MCPs?
Our interpretation of it at the moment is that full consultation is required for each stage, regardless.
But there's a clause, if you can tell us where the problems are clause by clause, because when we look at it, we don't see that.
Yeah.
Right? So it needs to, we need that specific. But the other thing you pointed out, the last thing you said, are you actually talking about, the refinement of cost? Are you actually talking about while we are assessing the MCP, or are we talking about two things here? So one is that you think that staging, just to clarify what you said, right?
Yep.
My understanding is one you're saying that staging doesn't appear to give you the simplicity you were seeking. That's one. So we could know the clauses they are.
Yep.
The other thing you're talking about, refinement of cost, and the commission looking at the refined cost. Is that while we are actually looking at the original MCP application, or as a second stage? So just clarify.
Yeah, I'll look to my colleagues for this as well. But I think it's potentially a bit of both. But in most cases it would be, we'd hope to get the, in some cases it will be, we've got the approval, a sort of conditional approval, but this particular piece of kit could vary, and the commission will relook at the cost for that kit later on.
Yes, so can I just ask a question about the specific point? Why not wait until the costs are applied before applying them? And also, why would this not apply to any MCP that's not staged?
I think this is where I think challenge exists at the moment. If it were expedient to sort of push that out to the next stage, well, that might be fine, except we're anticipating at the moment we have to do a full consultation behind that just to amend a more updated price or cost.
I think sometimes it's a timing issue. Like we might have a timing issue in terms of delivery. So we're wanting to make sure that we've got enough time. So and so that we're sort of running things in parallel in terms of including the costing.
So my understanding of the way it's set up at the moment is, let's say we have a 3-staged process, and you come in for stage 1 approval, P50 cost estimate, and make an estimate of costs for the subsequent stages. That all has to pass through an investment test.
Yep.
And then maybe somewhere down the track, 2 or 3 years, or 4 or 5 years, stage 2 is becoming relevant. Then you have to see if the situation still holds, apply the grid investment test again against alternative options, and come in for stage 2. I don't quite see where the issue is with the cost estimation being unclear, and why that's any different to an MCP where you would pitch up a solution with the cost estimate. So there's 2 key questions there, right? Why is it different? And what is the issue with costs?
Just an example with our NZGP1 is the purchasing. Our stage 1 MCP includes a StatCom at Haywards, sorry about the technical terms, and that thing could cost around 30 million, or costs are heading north at the moment, might be 40 million. We can estimate what it would cost today, but we haven't been out to tender for that piece of equipment because
you're after some sort of in principle agreement without defining the costs. But would you not then be required to give us, like, even if it cost us 100 million, the investment will still pass the investment test? If it's 50 million, it still passes. So we want an in principle decision too.
Oh, absolutely.
So you want an in principle. That's what you really want, right? Not the actual MCA or the out.
Yeah, what we're saying, I think what we're trying to say is this isn't an appropriate time to fix the MCA. We can say indicative, well, maybe for other parts of the project, but for that particular piece of kit, if we can get an in-principle decision that this is the right thing to do at this cost, we'll then go and get a cost, then take it to tender, and then refine the cost.
Because we don't believe that the staging process was intended to be used to, if you like, capture those sort of closer costs or more finite costs down the track of for instance, a StatCom here.
Yeah, it was about cost on 74. Yeah. Stage 2, 3, 4, 5.
Exactly.
For example,
Which was years.
Stage 1 was pretty much in the bag.
So is this problem because of the P50 requirement? Like if it was a P90 requirement, because you never raised it.
That's right, yeah. When it was a P90 type regime, then then you could absorb that risk within a P90. Now it's a P50 and no ability to vary it once it's approved.
So it's fair to say that there are some transmission costs that are much easier to define and some that aren't, right? And in this particular case, you're saying that this is really difficult. So is it just that this particular project is difficult? Is the StatCom, is it anything to do with DC or switched reactive devices? You're saying it's very hard to get cost estimates at the very early stage.
I think it's very hard right now because the suppliers are all busy and saying, go away, come back later, unless you're really serious about buying something off us.
So what would convince them would be an approval, regulatory approval. So it's kind of circular.
New Zealand's just a small country in the middle of the South Pacific, and somewhere else someone's buying lots of them. So why should we even bother? So I think that's the key point about the P50 to P90 change. The P50 approach change is good. It forces us to make sure we've got accurate costs for MCPs. And that typically should work well, but the challenge there is we spend more time investigating to make sure the costs are accurate because of the incentive regime around it. If there's some urgency in getting approval, that's more time in the overall timeline. So we're going to put up you've incentivized us to be more accurate, but in being more accurate, obviously we're going to take a little bit more time to get our costs right, rather than relying on P90. So is there some balance there where we say, hey, look, we've used, I don't know what the answer is, we've used reasonable endeavours to pin down all the costs we can, but we've got some costs which we're hard to be certain on to a P50. We would have to wait, do a tender in a market where no one really wants to talk to us anyway, because it's just some small thing in New Zealand. So I guess, is that a way of sort of framing the concern on our mind?
Yeah. I think the Bovota example where the Commission used exempt CapEx to balance the risk out by not giving us a reward if we underspend slightly below the MCA to allow that to allow that uncertainty feed through. It's that kind of approach, but just maybe a bit clearer for could that work in the staged, or could they just have it so the Commission could come back and look at it later, because obviously that decision you made in Bovota, you had to make it at the time and say, well, this is the proportion that you could exempt, whereas balancing the risk or benefit between us and consumers, it might have been better making that decision a little later. It wouldn't change the overall option analysis. It's just saying, well, there's 2 million that might be better in consumers' pockets than Transpower.
So this is an isolated issue, right? It's to do with that type of gear. It's not nothing. It's not like the whole project staging process itself is unclear and uncertain. Now, what you're saying, right? It's to do with the StatCom costs in this particular case, and maybe the DC upgrade costs. Very specific.
With that specific example, I don't want us to go down the route of let's just fix something for this specific example. I mean, going back to doing a straw person around a transmission line. Well, actually, does the staging work for a transmission line where we've got to do the option analysis and then go out to market, work out where the consenting are, a 5-year process.
That's why it was designed.
Yeah, but then if the point is, if the way we currently read it is if we get to the second stage, which is after we've bought land and we're just going, this is the cost of building the line, that we then have to do all the analysis again, do the long listing consultation, short listing consultation, because that's what our read of the IM says. Every stage we need to go out and do all the consultations again. That's pretty heavy, and in some cases, if it's just a sort of more minor MCP, that's a lot of burden on that. In some cases, it might be reasonable to go back out and consult on an option. So
maybe the short list would be sufficient.
Potentially, but it's just being clear. So I'm using this a lot, and we're not all about flexibility, but it's just going. The Transpower should consult where it's commensurate with the project or the type of project being considered.
Because things might change, and you might do the analysis, buy the land. And then all of a sudden, NTS solutions become much more cost effective. And so the long list consultation is designed to pick those up.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of the nature of the system, right? We can't predict what's going to happen.
Yeah. Maybe we're not using the right term when we call these things a stage, because the stage has a meaning under the CapEx IM and it's got requirements to go with it. We're sort of talking about cost refinement. I don't know whether there's any capital in thinking about a different definition, sort of refined costs, and a bit like the Australian regime, as we go along.
I'm just trying to split this, whether we can, two issues here. We're not throwing out a really good tool because of a DC upgrade cost that's uncertain because the manufacturer doesn't want to play ball, and what we can do to get around that without throwing out the wider tool, which I think is designed to retain optionality as much as possible.
Yeah, and I
reduce build lead times, right?
I agree with you. You're right. There's two issues. There's a cost uncertainty issue, and we're experiencing one with NZGP1 now, but that may not be isolated to that. So I think we just need to be careful to say that's a singular thing. And then there's a second one, which is staging was meant to make it more streamlined and help getting longer term multiple-stage projects through. Is the specification of IM going to do that for the different types of projects we're going to be facing, like the transmission line projects, multifaceted projects where we want to have one investment need and not necessarily, unless there's a material change, go through that every time and do TPM pricing every time and everything every time.
I think that word commensurate is quite important in terms of applying the investment test in different stages, because in some cases, you might be going for relatively small things as part of as a second stage. Maybe you introduce NTS into as a stage where we just want to, it's a smaller investment, and it could go through a much smoother, smaller process than a full scale. It's a major stage of and just some flexibility in terms of how that works. But I think commensurate would help.
Yeah, so I guess in that situation, you kind of refine the transmission solutions that are probably available, and the transmission network doesn't generally change a hell of a lot, even in 10 years, right? So, you've got your 3, maybe 4 options that you've tested at the shortlist stage. Yeah. You're really after the NTS solutions, right? So So okay.
So when you actually respond to this, the first one, can you respond to it in the light of I6?
Oh, sorry.
Close I6 or CapEx. Because when I read that, it says what you're talking about.
Yeah, extent of consultation should be commensurate with materiality of change.
Yeah,
but it's the earlier clause when we need to do the stage application. So we'll just identify that.
With I6.
Avoidance of doubt.
Don't like that.
Well, that's the complication.
Okay. All right, we'll look at that.
The other thing with, could I just add to that?
Yeah.
With the staging is that, back to John's point, that moving to P50 is a huge tension on us to get estimates right. But it's added 6 to 8 months to our process because we want to make sure that we get the cost right. If there was a process of being able to refine costs, we could speed the whole thing up and submit our applications at an earlier part of the process.
That's a really key point if you can make it.
So, yeah, we won't answer this question now, but before, like from the beginning of the CapEx, you were supplying us a P50 value. So how come, what has made this P50 value more interest than the previous one? Just, it'll be good for us to understand.
It was an estimated, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Because, yeah, you were supplying P50 value before, you supplying P50 value now.
But we did bear a penalty up to the P90.
Yeah. But why is it small? Oh, because this is a question to be asked. I need to consider.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great. So I just can I just talk about a tangential issue with respect to I guess it's to do with project staging, but also about like project lead time, and it's a question about run back arrangements.
Sure. So just for context, we do use run back special protection schemes in a whole range of places of the grid, especially around the fringes of the grid where load is reached capacity, the customer agrees that they'll be prepared to wear some risk of some of their load being tripped off if transmission line trips. Usually it's part of a plan to upgrade in the future, so it's buying time. The same for some of the generation developments that have come at us, again, sort of on spurred ends of the grid, Northland or whatever, we're open if those proposals arrive really quickly, that subject to them accepting the quality compromises, we can put run back special protection schemes in place. That'd be reasonably simple to engineer. So that's why they're mentioned in the transmission planning report. They're sort of part of our standard toolbox. Where we have a bit more of a struggle is on the interconnected grid. They need only if they can really be simple. So Simon, you'll know we did the Takanu intertrip arrangement years ago, and it's something like that acts locally to change the configuration of the grid. If we can come up with schemes like that, then they're definitely part of that interim playbook of tactical upgrades, special protection scheme, up to an upgrade.
So you're ruling them out.
Yeah. If they are with the Waireki Whakaaro Sea line way back when that was being approved, we looked at trying to make wide area schemes that would work for lots of parallel circuits. We came to the conclusion there's a lot of risk and you end up sort of trying to rerun the electricity market because you're pulling back the HVDC and you're doing all sorts of things. So that's sort of where we draw the line. So as part of interconnected grid upgrades, if a special protection scheme can be act local and be relatively simple, consider it. But certainly at the fringes of the grid where it's a simple connection or multiple connection arrangement, as I say, Northland's a case in point. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And I think, clearly it's case by case basis, right?
Yeah.
And I make a distinction between run back and SPS. SPS more for demand management.
Well, they're both called special protection
under the umbrella of SPS.
Yeah.
But I guess, the question would be and pitch to Transpower would be, talking about the build ahead of time question to accommodate generation. Why you'd have to explain why a run back in certain situations isn't appropriate, why it's not technically reasonable, and have to explain that, I guess. So it is, as you've admitted, they are installed in the grid for various reasons, but it has to be taken on a case by case basis, right?
And usually, if we're looking forward to generation and demand growth in the future, they're going to probably be something that's part of a transition to a bigger upgrade. And a tool, if you like, must have been caught out of being too late and not being able to connect a generator or something like that. A tool that actually helps manage the deferral risk until the actual asset replacement can be put in place.
Okay.
And definitely, that's how we see it.
Okay. no one has any questions further about project statement, we can move on to our next topic, and it's resilience. And I think Julian is on the line, isn't he? Yes, I could. Julian is the expert in reliability.
I'm here, thank you.
Yeah, good one, thank you. So I've been interested in resilience planning for quite a while, as John probably can attest to. I'd just like to understand Transpower's view about resilience planning going forward compared to what's been done in the past, what's been accepted and approved by the Commission, and especially RCP2. Go back and look at some of those submission material and the approvals of that. So just get a feel for what has changed in the space that has changed resilience. Resilience going forward. Like is there anything different that we need to think about if we are approving proposals for resilience mitigation? So off you go.
Julian, do you want to take the lead on this?
I can take a lead on that. Thank you, Simon. I think there are some differences since then, for sure, in terms of how the future use of the grid will be different than it was, say, 5 or 10 years ago. There'll be more reliance on the grid with electrification. We also have increased risks from climate change, and we also are facing increasing pressure from our customers, our shareholders, policymakers, and even with our consumer advisory panel, that we do more in this area, and obviously that means making the CapEx IM work for resilience. It doesn't really explicitly call it out at the moment, and I guess that's what our program is trying to do, and why we've submitted on it.
Okay, so the CapEx IM doesn't specifically talk about resilience at the moment, but my understanding of it, resilience events are N-1 plus events. Would I be right?
I guess
multiple circuit outages or multiple asset outages, wide area outages.
They're common mode failures, whether it's N-1 or N-2 or whatever. It's not. I think you could probably separate a bit. Security and resilience are a little bit different, because part of the funding is risk reduction, but part of it is also readiness to recover more quickly.
I was trying to delineate. I was trying to categorise the risk within the bounds of the two, because the two limbs of the grid investment test are the least net market benefit solution for a core grid investment, or positive net market benefit for anything else, right? So the core grid stuff is N-1. Anything else is either insecurity or generation connection, or N-1 plus. So my understanding of the way the CapEx IM is written at the moment is that a resilience event, which would be like N-2 plus or N-3, would qualify as something that would have to generate a positive net market benefit. So I'm wondering if we have to make any explicit changes to the CapEx IM or not, or if it's just an understanding of what limb qualifies as resilience mitigation CapEx.
Yeah, I think obviously if it's new lines, I mean that's a different approach to resilience. But if it's risk reduction through flood mitigation works, or strengthening a tower, or seismic strengthening, or even the readiness side, like having a mobile solution or spares, I think that's something a little bit different, and it is a challenge to use actuarial tools and use cost benefit testing in the same way that I guess other projects have, and I think that is a sort of like a consistent understanding across the resilience community, and I think we should be looking at the most cost-effective way of doing that. So it's probably more like an R&R approach that other jurisdictions have used.
Yeah, Julian, we might be talking two things here. I think Simon's interested in terms of resilience as part of an MCP, right? Whereas we've been talking about resilience as part of our base CapEx proposal. Right?
Yes.
So the concepts that Julian's talking about are for base CapEx, of having additional base CapEx to cover strengthening foundations and tower and river beds. Basically, having expenditure across the 4 R's of resilience response for WALDO events, wide area, large, so hey, it's relatively unlikely you might lose some towers in the Braided River, but when you do, it's going to take you a long time to fix it. So, sorry, confusing two things. I think Julian's coming more from in our replacement refurbishment, and it will be part of our RCP proposal. We've identified separately a pool of money that would, which I think we're talking about having a use or lose it arrangement on, which would be spent on hardening, if you like, some parts of the existing grid, or if they can't be hardened, having a better response plan so you can recover more quickly.
So in previous analysis, sorry to interrupt, it's always been very much a CapEx cost of the mitigation measure in an MPP sense being cheaper than the actual help event cost. It's been very simple calculation, no losses, no generation dispatch calculations required, no market considerations. It's very simply a loss load cost versus CapEx cost, and that was generally accepted as the framework that the Commission approved. Transpower set out its mitigations, change return periods so that resilience event would not necessarily disappeared, but it was the mitigated the impact of the event, okay, by estimating your loss load cost. So I don't, as you haven't sort of demonstrated to me or told me what's changed about the, other than the load has increased, perhaps there's more reliance on electricity. That would just mean there's more load at risk, perhaps for the same return period, and therefore a bigger cost that the mitigation CapEx hurdle has to be compared against. So if you can define the event, the resilience help event, as it were, and define the outage impact and the mitigation, it surely would be classified as END CapEx, would it not? Base CapEx.
So just on the base CapEx classification, I think we could get our resilience expenditure through under the base CapEx as clarified. I think why we've suggested as our preference for this resilience, we believe now and going forward is becoming more and more critical. Actually putting a light on it and saying this is what we're doing to improve resilience, putting that under E&D, putting it under R&R, we think that actually pulling it out and saying, look, this is what we're doing, and allowing it to be able to consult it on, and going to your point, in some cases, it's hard to justify it on a pure economic basis, but when we go out to stakeholders, the clear response we're getting is resilience is going to be even more important going forward, and that may not be reflected in our current goal, and it may not be reflected in the GRS type assessment.
Okay, so you're saying it'd be part of the programs of the base CapEx proposal, and you're just going to call it something else. But in fact, the actual structurally, the calculation framework isn't necessarily changing because of the situation, or
I'll pass that to Julie on the calculation.
Well, I think there's a real challenge in like a pass or fail cost benefit test to a lot of resilience work. Like if you took slips, for example, we have to come up with a range of probabilities of that slip, and it's got to be believable, and then we've got to come up with the different range of impacts, and then we come up with the different effectiveness of each intervention and the different costs of those interventions. And it's not a precision approach, and I think what's a better approach and is more consistent in the resilience community is to identify what's vulnerable, identify what's critical, and those that are vulnerable and critical, apply the more cost-effective solutions to where you see the most value in doing so. To do a pass or fail cost benefit test on resilience is really maybe ignoring the uncertainties that exist with all of these natural hazards, with and also you're not. We haven't got a future vol. What is the vol going to be in 10 years' time? Should we be working off that? We've got to take into account future loads. You end up doing a very complex analysis with lots of uncertainty, which we are doing it at a level that we can manage, but it becomes I guess a point of debating assumptions, saying if it's a pass or fail, and I think that's why it fits more in the R&R bucket than it does in the E&D bucket.
Yeah, I mean the framework as it stands back in the RCP2 days and before, it's deceptively simple, and it's just a simple NPV analysis of the capex mitigation cost versus your estimate of the outage duration and the impact of that. But you have to make an estimate of what that outage might look like, how quickly you can get power back on, and of course the mitigation measures. And that's really the complexity, isn't it? That from that period and that type of analysis. So it is a deceptively simple analysis.
That analysis we're doing through where we can to sort of identify what to prioritise our investments, not necessarily give it a pass or fail. And I think that's where you're sort of dealing with a lot of ranges and uncertainties, and there is also the fact that some of these likelihoods are increasing in the future. We're not sure of, there's the load increasing, the vols increasing, the societal, I guess, or even our customers are wanting this. So this is it's not a pure cost benefit approach, just the same way R&R isn't, I would suggest.
Well, the good thing about a framework that's repeatable and analytical is you also know when to stop, and otherwise it's just judgment and opinion about what it is you spend. So, I mean, we're an evidence-based decision maker. So,
yeah, and I think the information we'll provide will show that we're not doing it on low value areas, and we're trying to choose the most cost-effective solutions. But even how effective each solution is, they don't fully mitigate the risk, right? So that's another assumption in the whole process. So yeah, I'm not suggesting that we don't have any supporting information, Simon. I'm just saying it's probably not. It's not you can't apply the GRS to it, I guess, is what I'm saying, or the investment test.
Okay. Oh well. If anyone's got any further about this, I think we've announced this to death. Any questions from online attendees? I'll move on to the next topic. So there's two slides here about climate change effects, I guess. These are more of a top-down, I guess, philosophical discussion points around New Zealand Inc., benefits, and the next slide after that is about sustainability investments. I'm quite interested to hear about Transpower's sustainability work to date since the Better Regulation submission back in 2021. So with respect to the New Zealand Inc. benefits, as they are related to decarbonisation, one question I have is about the CapEx IM. Maybe you're not encapsulating the decarbonisation effects or the issues, keeping in mind that you do model carbon costs for generators when you do your dispatch modelling. So you're saying that there is something that's not captured in the CapEx IM.
Yeah, so what we capture in the investment test, please correct me if I get this wrong, guys, but we've got demand forecasts. So as the electrification increases, we do pick up in their baseline demand forecast. So those consumers switching from fuel-based EVs to fuel-based vehicles to EVs, other changes there. So that's picked up. We pick up the reduction in transmission losses if our investments do reduce transmission losses. So there's the benefit benefits there. And yes, as you mentioned, in terms of the electricity market benefit test, the emissions trading costs feed into the fuel costs, so those are picked up there as well. What we think is missing from that, and this is a difficult one in all cases, is the externalities from that. You know, if we're playing an enabling a role to assist that electrification, so you know, if a transmission investment can bring forward some electrification or enable process heat shift earlier, we can't capture that on the emissions benefit on the demand side. So that kind of ability to assist New Zealand Inc. in shifting. Yeah, and I mean, we don't have an answer to how you could purely pull it in, but we think it's, you know, it's something that we would at least like the ability to think about, and, you know, when we come to it, model it and then have that, you know, stakeholder wider discussion. But as it stands, we don't see, I think the Commissioner will agree, we don't see a way of being able to include that based on the capping side specification.
Take your hypothetically in Southland, you know, there was a need to build a new GXP or piece of transmission line to allow several meat processing or dairy plants to be electrified. We see for demand, right, which is part of it. We can work out that there'll be some renewable generation built or whatever to service it, but we don't capture anything in relation to the actual benefit to New Zealand or whatever, or to decarbonisation goals or New Zealand's competitiveness or anything like that as a result of having enabled that actual piece of decarbonisation. And a conversation we had earlier, the investment test is not going to be able to necessarily rely on the avoided fuel costs of fossil fuels. No. It's going to be choosing more between different renewables. So we just try to, as I say, we don't have the answer, but it just seems there has to be something else that helps the investment test do what, trying to be fact-based, intuitively would seem to be the right thing.
Yeah, but what are some of the societal benefits that, you know, we might be able to capture in that equation?
I guess going back to the first discussion we had, right, which was about the way the Australians are thinking about this counterfactual scenario where the transmission doesn't get built. And then what the cost that has, what cost impact that has, right?
And I guess two scenarios, either you don't decarbonise or you decarbonise at a much higher cost. So from applying your counterfactual,
so you haven't really tested that scenario, right? Like what would happen?
So retain the existing fuel against electrification.
Yeah, so for example, no transmission gets built, for example. What would you do to meet demand? Well, I'm not saying what transmission. What would be the counterfactual?
What would happen? Yeah. And if it's like conversions of dairy plants and things like that at scale, it's hard to know what the alternatives would be. I mean, they can put lots of solar panels on the roof of the dairy plant. Yeah, I don't know.
The alternative is what they're doing now. So they're using coal.
Yeah.
You're comparing electricity against coal.
Or making diesel, or quickly install open cycle gas turbines, maybe its own storage. You know what I mean? There's kind of, it's probably not such a crazy scenario thinking about it.
Yeah, I guess what we maybe want to test here is, you know, what are some of those wider benefits? So if we're displacing coal with electricity, you know, we're lowering particulates in the region. You know, what's the benefits to the health sector within that? How do you value that?
Oh, we're just talking about pure new market benefit testing. Yeah, but that's an externality.
Yes.
Can't go outside.
There's probably both. You know, can we do things within the net benefits test, or even, or do? I'm not saying we do, or do we get to a point where we have to introduce other things? Don't know. We don't know the answer.
Yeah, and we appreciate your decision framework, which, you know, is going to restrict what we can propose here, but we do want to highlight that. For us, it's a key consideration, you know, that we can't consider those. You know, we're getting the clear statement of intent from our ministers, which is, you know, we need to look at enabling renewables, but then when you run it through the way the net market benefit test is set up, it kind of the baseline assumes that demand will be met without determining if it's the most efficient way of doing it in terms of renewables. Obviously,
Well, you can't include it. Are you actually having a crack at trying to quantify some of these benefits and what it would look like? I mean, I think that's something that's quite useful to actually see.
To do that, yeah.
But I've also been quite interested to understand the counterfactual investment plan with no transmission upgrades in the next 20 years, right? What has to happen? What does that cost? That's effectively what the Australians have done. What you're talking about right at the start of this session.
I think we do, and we did talk about that, and I think just to reiterate that caveat point, AEMO has a lot, not more power, but a lot more ability to propose the overall development path. So they've actually said these are all the investments that need to happen out to 2050 to get to net zero, and that's not what we're doing with FMCP. While we model what we need to do, we're then looking at the piecemeal. What's the next stage? What's the next stage? What's the next stage? Whereas AEMO is doing it as a whole, and having that ability to go. We think this needs to happen. Yes, they have the counterfactual to compare to, but that's
Generate the benefit of justifying the transmission, right?
I think there's some quite significant things that would be difficult to quantify in this space as well. Like, for example, if you've got spare capacity on the grid, you might, a renewable generator investor might be more inclined to build their plant, and so you get a speedier uptake of renewable generation. Those sort of things are real.
Sounds like a statement of opportunities.
They're sort of real, but they're difficult to put a number on. But strategically they're important, and they're important to New Zealand as well.
That's what their statement of opportunities was designed to do. In fact, APA 2006, 2007 was actually identify all of those situations where generators couldn't see where the capacity grid was. Looks like we have a question here.
I'll just hand over to Mark Toner, who I see has his hand up.
Yeah, morning. Just reiterating, this is a pretty fundamental point, not just for Transpower, but for EDBs. And in our mind, it goes to the heart of what is in the interest of the long-term interests of end customers. And until we actually grapple with electrification and decarbonisation being in the long-term interests of end users, then I think we're all going to struggle. And I think the initial legal view from the Commission is they are very constrained in their statutory objectives. But I would argue the long-term interests of end users captures exactly the types of stuff that Transpower is saying here. But it is quite a fundamental issue for the Commission to grapple with. For me, the best case study example is all the solar in the north and all the interest in solar. But I understand Transpower are constrained from building a grid upgrade to get all that solar out of Northland. And when we think about unquantified benefits, we think about resilience for Auckland. If you could get a whole lot of solar out of the north and feeding it down to Auckland in the context of a lot of energy coming up from the south. But I don't think that type of resilience benefit is captured in anyone's modelling at the moment.
Thanks. Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, so fair point.
On the Commission side on this, this is something that Australia's grappled with, and so AEMO was given the power to do these central planning and integrated plans, but alongside this, it's already been proposed by the energy ministers in Australia that the national electricity objective, which is equivalent to our Part 4, is modified to include decarbonisation as an objective. I mean, so AEMC, the Australian Energy Market Commission, had the same view as the Commission. They couldn't take it into account, and I think it's the way that was got around currently before they're doing this change is the state government's just got involved and said we're going to build renewable energy zones, or we're going to fund this transmission line because we think it's going to deliver.
To help with the investment framework.
Well, that kind of works.
But
as long as you can direct the generation build to the right location, if you know what I mean. No, otherwise you're just building lots of transmission and hoping it will come. So the question will be how to target the right transmission at the right time and the right capacity is the question, isn't it?
Not that we're supporting what's happened over there. It's just interesting that obviously there's some latent frustration with state governments about the process, and that they're prepared to back consumers and taxpayers' money to just enable transmission investment, so help them decarbonise. We have a simpler governance arrangement.
Yeah, Australia has other problems. They complain about the price of electricity.
So if there's no other questions about that at the moment, I'll just move on to the next slide. It's the final slide about sustainability. I'm quite interested to hear what Transpower's view. I actually went right back to the better regulation submission for this point, and I think it's quite a topical industry issue. And it kind of tends, well, not even tangential, it is actually, it's related with decarbonisation, but in a different way. And it's about sort of existing carbon emissions or pseudo-carbon emissions, if you can talk about SF6. Quite interested to hear about how you've dealt or how you're dealing with the SF6 issue and what your plans are in the future, cost impact.
I'll briefly touch on that first question. Matthew Parks has hopefully joined from Transpower, who can actually get to detail on what we're doing around SF6. So I think that the reason we highlighted this here is when we originally put in our first letter, we were intensively looking at SF6, but then alongside SF6 and now the decarbonisation, there's also the biodiversity aspect, which is, so for carbon emissions, we've got the ETS, we can price those, and we can do some CBA around, but there was a question around, well, and back then the emissions price was a lot lower, and it was a lot harder to justify this, even though it would make a big reduction in our emissions. But then on the other side, we've got this biodiversity goals, which aren't legislated yet, and maybe a change to that, but they aren't legislated yet. However, we want to be operate under a social license, and we want to leave at least any works we do at a net zero biodiversity gain. But that's what we're looking for there, and we'll put some money into our RT4 plan. That's extremely hard to quantify, and doing a CBA on whether the biodiversity meets any requirements is quite difficult. So where that came from is we put a question into our consultation going, do customers, stakeholders, support us undertaking biodiversity, even if we can't quite justify it on a CBA basis? And what we're interested on this basis is how would the Commission view that? Is it something that they would view? Because as you've said a few times, you're very evidence-based, you want to make sure that it's economic for the long-term benefit of consumers, but if it's from our perspective, biodiversity is an important long-term benefit to consumers, but it's very hard to justify on a pure economic CBA basis. Well, it's very difficult to value that biodiversity gain that we might make. And then, so I'll make that point, and then I'll pass over to Matthew Parks, who can just talk about what we're actually doing in this area, so a bit more context.
Good morning, all.
Hi.
Where would you like me to start? SF6 or biodiversity?
SF6, maybe?
You're quite interested in, given that it's a really topical industry issue, and there's a lot of SF6 out there, the impact of the SF6 leakage is quite significant.
Yep.
How Transpower has been approaching this, I've just informally understood that Transpower has been leading the way in this area. I don't know what other EDBs are doing, but it's really interesting to hear how this has played out for Transpower and what your plans are for your SF6 fleet as it might affect future CapEx, IPP submissions, for example.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a little bit of context. So Transpower's got about 85% of New Zealand's SF6. So we've had a long-running program to basically unpack this, because we know it's a big issue for the sector, for the EDBs and sort of end generators as well, and really only regulated via the emissions trading scheme in terms of those emissions to air, etc. So we did a lot of sort of circuit breaker analysis, looking across our network at that individual circuit breaker performance, as we knew internationally, the lower voltage, there are some opportunities in the non-SF6 gas, and the higher voltage, that's where it gets really, really challenging. And so through that analysis of all those individual circuit breaking components,
we sort of we looked at the performance and where we could really get these carbon wins, or these kind of the best value benefits, and whether that was early proactive maintenance on specific types of circuit breaker versus the much more expensive replacement of the big GIS gas insulated switchgear. And so the analysis kind of, looked at those individual component parts through sort of, marginal abatement costs, as well as a carbon price at each of those investments. And where we got to, obviously it's a bit like the ECA, the decarbonisation fund, the value is really in chasing those proactive wins. Chasing some of those circuit breakers through the next RCP, to be able to, because that's really giving you a much greater benefit through proactive maintenance, i.e. less emissions, less leakage, and that gives Transpower that time to keep watching international developments and seeing where the move to the high voltage circuit breakers. And we have been, part of that approach was, not just doing the analysis internally, but worked quite closely with some of the EDBs. We've sort of shared some of our results and modelling, and they are facing very similar challenges, but, obviously in a lower voltage world. And again, I think our approach, Joel might have covered this earlier on, but again, Transpower wanting to be, we're in a unique operation down here, so we've watched very closely what's been happening overseas in the national grid, Scottish and Southern, internationally, just to make sure that we're, there are some challenges with this non-SF6 gear, so we want to be in that fast following as opposed to sort of early adoption space, given this, the risks of investing early in this.
I think just to round that out, so in our RCP4 proposal, the actual SF6 proactive reduction, proactive maintenance, that's falling into our reliable and safe core expenditure, because we now see it as being net beneficial against the emission trading costs. So we've done the CBA. We said actually putting this into base makes sense. We don't need to justify it separately. Okay. So yeah, it's been a big win for us in the area.
Now we have one listed project we're proposing at Ringapo. So as Matthew said, we have a lot of GISs. Two of the first ones are our more problematic ones, Ringapo and Clyde. The other Mitsubishi ones, for some reason, just keep on going. Although at some point they'll come to end of life too. But at Ringapo, we will have to find we've reached the point where we've maintained it to the point we cannot stop it from leaking enough, if you like. So we'll work with Genesis on some sort of proposal during RCP4 to replace it. Otherwise, we're trying to defer replacement until other technologies come along.
So your leakage mitigation strategy has allowed you to do the natural swap out as the end of life approaches.
And as I say, as Matthew said, for 220 kV breakers, and that we'll look at life extension until new technologies come along where possible. Yeah. The other big gain Matthew is aware of is just how we handle and manage, and that's where we're sharing with EDB. So just how you handle the degassing and regassing of SF6 can be a very big contribution to your emissions.
And one of the key figures, I guess, what's driving this is, again, Transpower's role in terms of getting this decarbonisation approach. How do we get to 2030 and 2050? And so I guess the main premise for this work has been driving that SF6 management strategy and those investments to align with these carbon reduction targets. And without investment, there's the headline figure here, there's 53% of our SF6 would still be in service in 2050. And so again, mapping that back to the next RCPs is really critical in terms of how that investment sits.
Okay, cool. If no one's got any questions about that, I think we'll wrap it up. I'll just as final slide on the next steps, just letting you all know that we've introduced a 2-week written feedback period. So great, people could write, present it in any way you want, a slide pack, an email, Word document, doesn't matter, but summarising any points you want to make, anything you've heard here, elaborating on any issues you've heard us discuss. So that's the deadline is 25 November. We'll collate that information and inform you about what we're going to do with that information. sort of the next sort of step in our process, especially for the capex IN specifically, things might operate at different timeframes, is Q2 2023 for a draft decision. So thank you very much. And I think Dane, I'll hand over to Dane.
Yeah, just to clarify as well, and Simon did mention during the presentation, but we didn't probably say as clear as we could at the start that there is other work in the transfer space that's progressed outside of the workshop, such as the MCP threshold, discount rate, etc. So this is just a subset where we're seeking further information on some specific points. Really pleasing with engagement today, both with people online, but particularly to transfer in the room who made themselves available. It's great to see a two-way conversation. I know it's a little bit awkward when things like this are recorded, so just appreciate that you were willing to speak and give up your time. I think in terms of next steps for the IM review,